All right. Hello and welcome, everybody. Pumped to be here. You are listening to AM 1160, Atlanta's Catholic Radio. This is Honest to God, episode number 235. Is that right?
Yep, 235.
Heck yeah.
Right on the dot.
It's going to be a great show. We're going to be talking about theistic apologetics. We're going to be getting into God, right? And why we know that he exists, right? We're going to be talking about everything from the intellect and Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways, getting into all things theistic apologetics. So I'm excited to be here. We got a lot of returning people today.
Oh, John Henry, I'm so sorry.
Sorry. Okay,
gotcha. I'm actually getting a phone call right now from my friend Bryan.
Okay.
Who he said he wanted to be on this show.
Incredibly rude. I know you're going to edit this out in post. All right.
Yeah, totally going to edit out in post.
Hello,
Brian.
Hi. I'm here.
What? Brian, how are you doing? What?
I am fantastic. How are you guys?
I'm doing great. How serendipitous. We're literally doing an episode on theistic apologetics and whether or not God exists, or why we know God exists. It's not really a debate that we're going to have on the show. And this is perfect. It's almost as if producer Ben planned it.
Definitely didn't plan this. What?
Well, we're going to do our standard one intro question with everybody, but I don't know if you've ever seen an episode of the show before, Brian, but if you're new, you give us 5 things, and because you're phoning in all the way from, let me check caller ID, Connecticut. If you can just tell us a little about yourself, because I can't think of anybody more perfect to be going over this topic with.
Sure, I would be happy to. My name is Bryan Mercier. I am a Catholic speaker, a retreat leader, an author, an apologist, and I started Catholic Truth, an organization to help people know the truth of the Catholic faith and God. And many years ago, I did not know how to explain my faith, and in fact, I ended up crying when some girl challenged me on how do we know God exists, and she would tell me, prove your God exists to me. And I would try to give her some answers. Well, how else did we get here? And she'd say, I don't know. Let me think. The Big Bang, string theory, bouncing universe, multiverse. And she started going down all these different things of, she said, we don't need God because we have all these other theories that can bring about life without God. And so I said, God's like the wind. You can't see him, but you can feel him. She's like, sure. She's like, go get me a trash bag. She's like, I'm going to open it up. The wind's going to blow up the trash bag, and you're going to see the wind's real. I'm like, okay, I quit. So objections that I brought up, she would shoot down. And so that was kind of the beginning of how it started. And I don't like to believe things that I don't understand, and so it sent me on a search to understand my faith more. And so honestly, I've been challenged by Jehovah's Witnesses, Protestants, all different religions, and spent the last 20 years looking up all the answers, and now I teach it professionally to other people so they don't have to be as awkward as I was.
That's amazing. Praise God.
Great intro.
I know, that is one of the best 5 facts I've ever heard. We're going to go down the line and get our 1 fact from everybody. 5 from Haley. I hope you're prepared. But first, I don't think you mentioned this in your intro, Brian. You just wrote a book on this, or I don't know if you just wrote, but I know that you got a book out on God. And
why do you believe in God? And it's 15 real Catholic conversations that I've had with atheists, skeptics, non-believers about the question of God, Jesus, the Bible, crusades, and different objections that people have, Galileo, science, religion, all of that. I kind of taught, all the questions that I've heard all over the years, I kind of just put them all in a book.
Heck yeah. No, that's incredible. I love the fact that it's sort of goes down all those other pathways too. I want to do an episode soon where we talk about all those historical misconceptions about the church and get into the Galileo controversy, get into the Crusades, get into all of these things that have been so just watered down by our modern understanding of history and Catholicism. We might bug you about coming back for one of those.
That sounds good, because I would even say that they haven't been watered down; they've just been trashed. Like
Absolutely.
Nobody understands what these things are. So I think it's very important to get the truth of them out there.
Absolutely. All right. Well, those are Brian's 5 things. Let's do 1 from each of you guys, 5 from Haley, and then let's get into this topic because I think we're going to spend a lot of time on this one today. I'm actually super pumped for it. We're gonna mix it up. We're going to start with Mackenzie.
Okay.
We'll start with Brian, but now we're going to Mackenzie.
Okay. My fun fact, I would say, would be that for one summer I was a lifeguard and swim instructor.
That doesn't sound very fun at all, but I will allow it for the sake of time.
Okay, yeah.
Did you save anyone's life?
Well, okay, when I was doing swim lessons, this little kid kind of started like actively drowning a little bit, and so we just pick him up and sit him down, and
that
was the extent of it.
No, that makes it more fun. You saved a life. Congratulations, Mackenzie. No one will fact check any of this. That's great. That's perfect. Cameron.
Yes. So my fun fact, it's basically a little story, but so when I was in 6th grade, we went to a private school, so we had uniforms, and it was the first day of 6th grade. We're in the parking lot, and it's like a minute till we have to go inside. So I'm trying to put my socks on, and they didn't fit because I had last year's socks, I guess.
I hate it when you get
I
last
know,
year's
and
socks.
so they wouldn't fit, and I have to have them or else I'm going to get a violation and stuff. And so I grabbed a pair of scissors and cut the socks in half, so I only wore like the leg part of the socks and not the foot part.
Genius. Dude, that's thinking outside the box.
I know.
I like that.
Smart.
We need more people like that.
It's warm for a year.
This episode of Honest to God is brought to you by thinking outside the box to get away with your inappropriately fitting Catholic school
That's
uniform.
exactly right.
Yeah, very good.
I thought it was brought to you by Holy Socks.
Holy Socks would have been way better. Why isn't Michael leading this episode? Kill it.
I don't want
That
that
was
show.
really good. All right, Haley, you give 5.
My first fun fact, I was asked to think of 5 fun facts 5 minutes before the show started.
I will allow it
Okay.
because I feel bad for
10
you.
minutes. I texted her 10 minutes before
I
the
didn't
show
get the
started.
text.
15
I didn't
minutes
get the
sitting in this
text
room before the
until I was in the room.
Okay.
I will say. Anyways, my second fun fact is I go to Wyoming Catholic College.
Heck yeah.
It's a wonderful place.
I'm a big fan. I give a lot of shout outs to Wyoming Catholic on this show. Great school.
It's pretty great.
Check it out. guys.
And my third fun fact is that I have a chess club that I'm president of.
I played chess with my son today.
Oh,
I did.
wow.
And I wrecked him. I was really proud. I mean, he's 10. He played. He's a good 10-year-old. And I've just decimated him. He was also sick. But,
That's unfortunate.
yeah.
Yeah.
Can't
I
have
did the
a
same
big
thing with my
dogs.
brother today, too. So.
What's that, Brian?
I said I love chess too. My dad decimated me when I was growing up every single time for like 5 years. I thought I was the worst person ever. So I started playing my friends, and I'm like, oh, I beat everybody. No one can beat me.
That's my whole philosophy with my son was just, we started playing every day when he was 4. And every day I beat the snot out of this kid in chess. And when he was 8 years old, he beat me for the first time. And it was like a good pride check for me and the biggest deal in the world to him. So we play pretty regularly still. Didn't mean to derail your chess
No,
conversation.
it's
Sorry.
okay. That was one of the facts. So, huh?
2 more.
Fourth fun fact is I've known John Henry since 7th grade.
It's true. We were not in 7th grade
No.
together.
I said I
He
was in
in
7th
7th
grade.
grade. Yeah.
And my fifth fun fact is I've done the Camino de Santiago.
That's really cool. When did you do that?
2019.
That's cool. How did I not know that?
I don't know how you didn't know
I'm sure
that.
you mentioned it. Haley was in my youth group for years.
Yeah.
So that's super cool.
Yeah.
That sounds like something that Michael would have done. Have you ever done
did.
a Camino? You did? No way, really?
I did it for about 3 years. I might be going back to Portugal, do the Portugal way with a professor I had in college, and he's like a 70-year-old guy. I was 26 at the time when I did it for the first year, so it was like a Gandalf and Frodo trip. So it was pretty fun. And I went back every year after that until COVID put a wrench into that, but kicking it back up this year, hopefully.
That's super cool.
And we're talking to Janice, we should do a Camino podcast where people just talk about favorite stops in the Camino.
100%. I want to do a pilgrimage one in general, too, and maybe get more specific. I love that. That'd be awesome. All right, well, that counts as a fun fact, unless you got another one lined up.
The only one was like Cameron and Mackenzie's, I'm an identical twin. My identical twin was on Dancing with the Stars, so when they ask if I was the one who was on TV, I absolutely say yes.
Yeah, sure. I mean,
Nice.
genetically speaking, you were on TV.
Besides the fingerprint, yeah.
That's great. No, that is awesome, guys. I'm really excited about this crew. I think we're going to have a good conversation today. And I do want to focus back on Bryan for a little bit because you told that great sort of, a perfect elevator pitch of a testimony, right, about why you're doing this. And I want to go back a little further, though, and ask you, why are you Catholic to begin with? Because we all have those times. I don't know your story. I don't know if you're a cradle Catholic. I don't know if you're a convert. But I work with a lot of high school kids in particular. And the conversation I have with them pretty regularly is you're at an age where you're either going to own this for yourself, right? And it's going to stop being mom and dad's, religion that you're following the footsteps of, or you're going to leave it. So how did you become a Catholic to begin with? Yeah,
let's back up. I'll give you my elevator life story. So I grew up Catholic, oldest of 6 kids, and I ended up having a lot of abuse. I was bullied a lot. I had a lot of things in my childhood that didn't make me happy, and I ended up becoming very angry, very depressed by high school, and I ended up dressing in all black, carrying weapons, hating the world, being super angry, super depressed, and really just I didn't know what to do with myself, so I just stuffed all my pain and anger in for a year, year after year after year for like 7 years. And I prayed every day. My mom taught me to pray since I could talk. So, I mean, even in spite of all this anger and depression, I was still praying. Prayed the rosary every day. We went to confession once a month. We went to mass once a week. I prayed before I went to bed every night. And God never really answered my prayers. And so I figured, 1, God's not real, or number 2, he is real, but he doesn't like me. Probably true, nobody else does. Or number 3, he does like me and he is real, but he's like this old guy about 50 billion kilometers away. And, it takes forever for our prayers to get up to him. Or
sure.
Maybe he's just kind of busy. So that was kind of my Catholicism. I believed in God. I prayed every day, but I was also had a lot of problems that I didn't really know what to do with. And my mom was very concerned about me. She thought about sending me to jail so I could get my life straight, but she decided to pull out a different card. And so she sent me to a Catholic college to try to get some Jesus in me.
Nice.
And so, she sent me to Franciscan University of Steubenville, Ohio.
I'm an alumni of Franciscan. That's great.
Oh, you went to Stupidville. That's great. Yeah, that's what I went to. That's why I was like, Mom, I'm not going to go to Stupidville. Come on. And so, it changed my life. All things being serious, and literally, God transformed me there, inside out and backwards, upside down. It just took out all of the hate and the rage and the pain, and he just filled me with overflowing, unending amounts of peace and joy and love and goodness. So, if people ask me why I'm Catholic, why do I believe in God? Well, because God changed my life.
Praise God.
Yeah, from there, I ended up just wanting to share God with everybody. And we used to go to Pittsburgh every Saturday morning to pray in front of the abortion mill. And I remember fundamentalists and Jehovah's Witnesses, and everyone used to gather because we used to have 300, 400, 500, 600 Catholics there every Saturday morning, and they knew we were there, so they'd come try to convert us. And I remember Jehovah's Witnesses coming up to me, and they're like, "Why are you Catholic?" I'm like, "Why not?" And they're like, "Well, let's see, because Jesus wasn't God, first of all. On the cross, what did Jesus say? He said, my God, why have you forsaken me? So why do you think Jesus is God?" I'm like, "I don't know." And he's like, "Who was he talking to, himself?" I'm like, "I don't know." And so I realized quickly that I loved God, but I couldn't explain my faith to save my soul.
Sure.
And around that same time, I had these fundamentalists coming up to me and saying, "Oh, your church was a blending of paganism. Constantine, the pagan emperor, took Christianity and blended it with paganism, and the result was Roman Catholicism. So that's the church you're part of. Show me where Pope is in the Bible. Show me where the word purgatory is in the Bible. Show me where priests can forgive sins, and I'll become Catholic today." And I couldn't answer any of it. So week after week after week, I went home looking up all the answers, bringing them back, getting more beaten over the head, going home looking it up, bringing them back. I did this for like 6 months. After about a year, I became really smart in my faith, looked up a lot of things. After 2 years, I was going after them and visiting their churches and evangelizing them.
Oh, that's so cool.
Now it's 20 years later, and the reason I'm Catholic is, number 1, because God is real. Number 2, because Jesus came down and he is God. And number 3, Jesus started the Catholic Church. Out of the tens of thousands, millions of churches on this earth, Jesus started one church, and that's the Catholic Church. So despite all the problems, despite anything you might throw out there, the reason I'm Catholic is because God himself started this church.
Praise God. That is a pretty great list of reasons that you are Catholic today, man.
That's fantastic.
And I loved how you said that you started with this conversion of the heart. That's a recurring theme on this show, right? Because I became Catholic, sort of the inverse of you. I was so into being right. God took a hold of my concupiscence and my pride and said, all right, you want to be right about stuff? How about you start digging into this? And I did my angsty, atheist, agnostic, whatever, and it became sort of this weird deisty enlightenment understanding of God. But I was just into it. I was into the philosophy and the theology, and I was reading and I was looking up all of this stuff. And I had this conversion of mind first that was followed by a conversion of heart. And I think a lot of young men deal with that. But I think you got it right, because that conversion of heart is so much more important. It's great that God gives us an intellect. It's great that we can find him and know him and understand him with our brains and with logic, because he is real. But that conversion of heart is something that was it was a lot harder for me, and I think it's a lot harder for other people as well. I want to open that up to any of you guys too.
I just want to say that's really important. You can have all the answers, but if you're, are not nice about it and you say it in such a way that you don't want to make people want to listen, then it doesn't help to have all the right answers. Because after I became smart, I also became like you. I became cocky. I knew it all, and I wanted to beat up people over the head, and I did. And then this one woman came up to me, and she yelled at me, and she's practically nose to nose in my face, and she's yelling at me, and she's like, "You have no right to be here in front of this abortion place. This is not your business. You don't have ovaries. You're not a woman. Get out of there." And I was like, well, if you're here, that means you're against God. If you're against God, then you have no right to be here, because you're, I basically told her a whole lot of bad stuff that I regret, and I ran away in a huff, and I was super angry. And 5 minutes later, after I calmed down, because I used to get so heated because I couldn't make these silly people understand. That's my attitude back in the day.
Sure.
And I came back 5 minutes later. My friend Bridget, who couldn't explain her faith to save her soul, was sitting cross-legged on the cement, and she had this lady's head in her lap, and she was stroking the lady's hair. The lady was laying on the cement, and she was coughing up and crying so hard I thought she was going to cough out her lungs. And Bridget was just loving this lady. And I thought to myself, what did I do wrong? How did Bridget get through to her? And I couldn't even see how angry I was at the time. And God hit me with a lightning bolt right there, changed my life forever on how I evangelize and do apologetics. And he said, Bryan, if you don't do it with love, don't do it at all. It's all about love. I love this woman as much as I love the Pope and as much as I love you. So from that day on, I have loved souls with a fierce love. Even if they yell and scream at me, I really just try to love them and give them the answers that they need to save their souls.
So I'm curious about the part of your story where things were all going wrong for you, and there was no signal that God was actually in your life. Where was it that God actually revealed himself? I know we're supposed to talk about why is God, but I think those experiences are interesting. I know people in my life where it seems like they just don't get a break, and it's easy to see there was that break in my life and God was there, the good thing happened, but it's so much harder to see God in the suffering, especially when he might have been there and maybe people from the outside, but when it's not clear, it's very clear that he's in the suffering and you can see it, but when you're just getting beaten over the head over and over again, for those who are out there either listening who feel that way, what was that for you? Or are there ways that you can, is it the logical route that then leads to the heart, like John Henry was saying, or what have you seen in those scenarios? Because you can logic someone out to wazoo, but if they don't experience their own life, then it's like, what does it matter?
100%. That's a great question, because I think most atheists, in my experience, are what I call emotional atheists. They haven't got their prayers answered, and therefore they kind of fall away from God. Oh, well, God doesn't love me, or he's not there, and they pretend he's not there. Or, if God really loved me, he would have saved my grandmother. They can't understand the suffering and the bad things that have happened. And I had a lot of that too, but I had my mom praying for me the whole time, crying for me, sacrificing for me. She never gave up on me, which is helpful. And I never stopped praying. A lot of people give up early on God and they stop praying. For some reason, I kept praying through it all, which I think really helped me. And my mom sent me to a youth group so I could have like-minded people. So even in the dark times, there were some, tidbits of light too, where I had some hope, where I may have got a Bible verse or where something spoke to me. Little bits here and there was very helpful. So I think being plugged into a Newman Center or a youth group of some sort, a young adult group of some sort is helpful. You might have a lot of bad, but there's going to be some good as well. For me, it was when my mom sent me out to college. I was super angry. I swore all the time, like every other word, and people didn't judge me. They just loved me. So I'd say the big change happened for me when I went to my college, and my college was half charismatic, which means they put their hands up in the air, hallelujah, we love you, Jesus. The other half was very traditional, very, different kind of devoutness. And I had never even heard of a charismatic thing before. I was like, that is so dumb. I do that at concerts when I go to Van Halen. Yeah, I put my hands up in the air, but at church, come on, not. And so I used to make fun of the kids there for it. And I remember I was at Mass once. I was the fifth pew in the front, and God wanted me to put my hands up in the air. Being the good Catholic that I was, I told him, no way. Nope, not going to do it. And he didn't make me, but he said, just take a chance, Bryan, take a chance. Come on, give me a chance. So I said, fine, God, if I'm going to make you happy, I'll put my hands up in the air. And I did it just a little, not like all the weirdos, just a little. But that was the moment that changed my life, because I guess looking back in hindsight, if someone stuck a gun up to your back and said, stick them up, what would you do? You'd say, I give up, I surrender. And looking back, I realized that all God wanted me to do was stop fighting, stop trying to fix all my own problems, stop trying to fix my own pain, and he just give it all up to him. So at that moment I did. I just gave it all up to him, and he hit me like a ton of bricks. It was like an 18-wheeler truck going 55 miles down the highway, and just imagine being hit by a truck, like how hard that's what it felt like when God hit me for the first time. And I won't go through the whole story for lack of time, but it ended up, he gave me a vision that would change my life, and he spoke a few words to me that would change my life. And it took a lot of years for me to get there, and a lot of unanswered prayers, or so I thought, unanswered prayers. I just wasn't ready for them. But he knew the moment when I would be ready and when I needed it. And, that was the moment. And I would have several more after that, but over the next year, he would really change my life.
No, that's huge. I love how you can kind of pinpoint that moment too. I mean, does anybody here have any sort of a God moment like that? Because that's something that I want to get into, especially in the second half. I want to get into some of the logical reasons we have to believe in God, talk a little bit of Thomistic, 5 ways and all that stuff. But does anybody have, talking about that conversion of heart, any moment like that you can pinpoint? Because I was trying to think of a moment like that I've had similar to that in my own life, and I couldn't come up with one.
I don't have like a moment. Mine was more of like a process, and it was kind of like the logic route. Right. So I don't really have like a moment. I don't know if anyone wants to.
I have an initial moment, then follow-on moments, and I don't know how. I'm just now starting to talk more about these experiences. Mm-hmm. I don't know how often they were, where I kind of made the assumption, all people who end up becoming deep in their faith have these moments, and you realize that's not always the case, or maybe not yet. But sure. My initial one was, my growing up was more of, I was never atheist or agnostic. I knew there was something there, but I kind of rejected most of it, wasn't serious about it. But for me, it was in the early days of Focus, when the Focus Conference was called the Focus Conference, not Seek. And so I think it was the second year after Father Mike started his podcast or something. And I remember he was at that conference, and I look back like years later, like, that was him. And I was down there for a cute blonde girl on a 300 trip down to Florida, because I lived in Illinois. So I was like, sure, I'll do it. It's one of those where my parents said, you're going to a Catholic conference? Like, we'll pay for that. And I said, you don't know the reasons, but I'm going down to Florida. But sure enough, when I was down there,
Holy Spirit,
he meets you where you're at.
Working through pretty blonde girls, it's okay.
Yeah, And once I got down there, that kind of, that was not the focus anymore. It's a funny story about that girl. She actually had a miracle through a trip that we went to, a pilgrimage. That's for another day, like a very clear miracle. It was really cool. But here, when I was at the conference, this was the time where I didn't actually understand that the Eucharist was Christ. Sure. Like, literally, I think I learned this on that trip or something. Mm-hmm. And I didn't
really raised Catholic.
Yeah, I was raised Catholic. But it was a suburban church. Love the people, all the best intentions,
Same.
But it just wasn't taught. It wasn't that traditional, and so I never knew that. And so I thought it was still preposterous. But when they had an adoration, I had this just profound experience at adoration, and the only way I could experience it is because I didn't have a chance to logic that. I didn't have a chance, I didn't even understand it or know it, but there was this complete surrender in front of Christ in front of me, and that I just really couldn't explain. And then that started the process of logicking back into it. It said, I had this experience. I don't understand nor agree with the logic of it. And then I would then go to be the devil's advocate, and then back your way into now that I've proven myself wrong,
cool.
Then you say, okay, I guess this is what it was. And then the more that you then start to listen to God's voice, the more that those come to you. And it's not just these little whispers, but every once in a while you'll get that, this thing that was said to me was not me. And then it's...
Yeah, I'm having that 5 years removed, or 10 years removed now, when you look back and you sort of connect the breadcrumb dots, and it becomes such an interesting thing. I love it. Cameron?
Yeah. So I'm, a cradle Catholic, so I've obviously always believed. But I remember one time on a life team retreat, and it was nothing special. Not that I didn't believe, it was just a regular retreat. But I remember being in adoration and just praying and kneeling, and nothing the Vatican's concerned about, but I feel like I could just see Jesus. And I know I couldn't, but it was just my imagination just in front of me.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, if you could see Jesus, what questions would you ask him? And so I started asking all these questions, and just with every question, I felt so much peace after asking each, almost like I knew the answer. What kind of questions? Well, I can't even remember. I have them on my phone. I'll show them later.
Do you really?
Yeah,
Please bust them out for second half.
Not right now, but I will later. Maybe in the second half. And but I remember, just feel like I'm just kind of intellectually conversing with him, and he just said, "You are my son, and I love you." And I bursted into tears because it was so authentic, and some things are just so undeniable. You cannot, fathomably say, if I look in the mirror and tell myself, "You're my son and I love you," I'm not going to feel a thing. But it's just so authentic and so true. That's undeniable.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. That is a great story.
Yeah. I didn't need it, but...
Well, we're about to take a break because we're almost at halftime. But before we sign off, Haley, Height, would you mind, because we didn't start with a prayer, let's break with a prayer.
Cool, I like it.
And would you mind saying a prayer? We're talking about all of these people who we're all searching as humans, right? Our hearts will not rest until they rest in the Lord. And can you say a prayer just for the people who might be searching out there for some connection with God and the success of the rest of this episode and all that fun stuff?
Yeah, for sure.
Whenever you're ready.
Yeah. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts and minds of all of the listeners, and as we continue to converse of kind of the reasonable truth of your existence, also show your existence to us in our own lives, in the little ways and in the big ways, however it is best for us. And we ask for the intercession of your Mother, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy
Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death.
Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. That is a great way to end this half. All right, and we are back. Super excited to be here. This is our second half of our God episode.
God.
Theistic apologetics.
Is he real?
What is he? Who is he? Spoiler alert. Yes, he is. Mm-hmm. And on the last episode, or the last half, we talked a lot about sort of those heart moments, right? And that movement of the heart, and how that movement of the heart, I honestly think, is a recurring theme on the show, more important than the movement of the mind. That being said, the movement of the mind is what seems to convert so many people and bring so many people in to a deeper relationship with our Lord. So I'm curious, and I want Michael in a second to sort of expound on this because he made a great point during the break. But I'm curious, Bryan, about what your tool bag looks like in terms of the discussions you're going to have with a kid. Say they're in college, or we're going to expand kid all the way up to 20-somethings, young adult, and you're talking to them at a party or in a bar or somewhere, and that awkward conversation comes up, and they're asking you about God and why do you believe in that? And it sounds weird and hokey. I can't tell you how many random bar conversations have turned back to the existence of God. So I'm curious about what that sounds like and what you say in that situation.
Yeah, I get into conversations all the time, everywhere, about the existence of God, just religion in general. And if someone, comes up and says, kind of my book, why do you believe in God? That's the question. They say, I don't believe in God. And I'll say, okay, why? That's my first question, because we can't understand. I can't talk to them unless I know why they don't believe in God. And they might say, well, I don't believe in a God who, kills innocent people. I'm like, well, I don't believe in that kind of a God either. Let me tell you about the God I do believe in and how he changed my life. So it might take that approach. Or people say, oh, well, science. I believe in science, so I don't believe in God. I'm like, I believe in science too. In fact, the priest who married me is a quantum physicist. In fact, he has a PhD and graduated #1 in his class from Princeton with a degree in quantum mechanics. I was like, do you have a high degree like that in science? And so I was like, in fact, I say 99% of scientists over the last 2,000 years have been Christians. So science and religion don't have to contradict each other. In fact, we think they go together pretty well. So do you have any other reasons that you think God doesn't exist? So I kind of go through, try to meet them where they're at, ask them a lot of questions, or, if they're looking for some proof, I might give them some basic proof. If they say, well, why do you believe in God? I'll say, well, order and design. They say, what? I said, order and design. They said, what does that mean? I said, it means, imagine you walk down a beach and you see a heart drawn into the sand. And it says, inside the heart, it says, Johnny loves Susie. And then it says, XOXOXO. And so I said, do you think that the waves came up and made that heart with the English words in it? Or do you think that was a random occurrence of chance? And they say no. And I said, or do you think it's more reasonable to believe that two intelligent people who were in love drew that heart and drew those words? And he said, yeah, that. And I said, exactly. I said, we are intelligent human beings. We recognize intelligence when we see it, and we know that's not an accident. In the same way, we know that Mount Rushmore is not an accident of rain and wind and erosion over millions of years. It just happened by accident. And so I said, when you look at the universe and you see millions of universal constants and galaxies and orbits and everything, helium, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, everything else has to be perfect to bring about life. We say that's not an accident. Things didn't just come about by nothing, from nothing, because of nothing, and for no reason whatsoever. We believe it had a cause, just as the heart does, just as the mountain did. So we believe that the universe has a cause, and we just give that cause the name God. That's kind of where I start.
That's really interesting. And then you sort of expound up from that, obviously. It's so interesting when I talk to people about the existence of God, and as soon as you start to make some of those arguments, you talk about unmoved mover or first causation or one of those things, they immediately say, well, what about Jesus? It's like, no, we're not talking about that yet. We're talking about God's existence. We've got to establish that God creates, right? That God is a thing that is. And then we'll expound a little, we'll go up a little higher, starting with theistic apologetics, then Christian apologetics, then Catholic apologetics. I might have shouted this out on the show before, but there's a great article written by Matt Fradd called The Apologetics Mansion that goes through that, and it's the most interesting thing in the world. And I think something we struggle with a lot of times as Catholics is we're arguing with the atheist in the bar about the Immaculate Conception of Mary with somebody who doesn't grant that there is a God or doesn't grant that Jesus Christ was his son. And we just talk in circles. It's useless. What are y'all's thoughts? I'm curious about the kind of conversations you've had and the sort of challenges you've gotten.
What I've found is that so my previous life was working in business and what's called demand generation. And so it's basically, how do you get someone who doesn't even know about your company to then get to kind of know about the company and then get you to buy the product. And when you look at it that way, we'd build these systems that basically would find people online, build a relationship with them, and then get them to buy the product.
Sure.
And before I even got into it, when I saw it, I said, man, what these guys are doing is basically evangelization, because what it did was it said, hey, wherever you're at, what questions are going on that person's head. So in the secular world, when they're looking to buy a product, they're looking to buy a car, it doesn't start with, hey, I want to buy a car, or hey, I want to buy a Camry. It's, man, I just have to replace my oil in my car like every 2 weeks. There must be something wrong with it. Like, right. That's causing a pain for me. Like, I have to replace the oil. So the first question is like, how do I fix the oil in my car? And then, that eventually goes to, well, maybe I should get a new car. And then from there, it's like, well, where do I go? Which car should I get? Well, which car? And then goes, well, where should I go to buy the car? And then who should I talk to learn more about that? And then they finally make the decision. Well, the way that we think about our faith is the exact same way. Like, you wouldn't think to just go to someone and say, hey, you have a problem with your oil, and the car dealer comes and says, hey, you should actually go buy a BMW instead. Like, that makes no sense. Right. To your point about that. So it's like, why do we not treat evangelization, look at it in the same way, where the questions are first, what's the pain that they're experiencing in their life? And whether that be a relationship challenge, someone died, something or something miraculous, there's something big happened, but then why did that happen? Well, they search for reason, because we're intelligent beings, and then the question goes, the progression, like, what is that? Well, was that God? Well, is there a God? And then if there's a God, well, if there's a God, then which God? And if there was a God, then which religion? Okay, well, which religion is right? Well, from those religions, well, why is this religion right? And then once you kind of have found the logic that is religion, then you can go beyond. And between each one of those question phases, there's usually this encounter experience that then will say, is there God? And then you have like that God experience that you were talking about. We said, I am God, and you are my son, holy cow, I can't, like, I go with logic, but then you actually had an encounter, because it's not just this logic project of us as humans, is he makes himself present.
It's not just this logic project. Yes, 100%.
So that's what it's just connecting like this world, because it comes down to relationship. It's like, why is it true? It's not because religion has been invented to mimic what convinces people. It's that, no, there's a truth that humans are relational beings. And why are we relational beings? Because we are made in the image of Christ, who is abounding love, and with love there is a relationship. So there's a truth to our call towards relationship, and there's ways that healthy relationships work. And so that's the reason why it's not that, hey, this thing in business works in evangelization. So no, this thing works in business because it's inherently based off of the fact that we are relational beings seeking that connection. And
no, that's great. I loved, what you said and how it does it is a good analogy with the apologetics mansion thing that I brought up earlier, about how so many of the questions that we have that don't seem to have anything to do with God all tie back to that. Everything from moral questions, for the reason Bryan was standing outside of that abortion clinic, to our everyday lives, with how we interact with our spouses and with our friends and with our children. It ultimately comes down to, no, we need to do this because we are ordered, we are created by something for a purpose, and we need to reflect that. That's cool.
I think for anyone who's listening, why it matters, like the YM, I'm assuming a lot of people who are listening are Catholics, because we're listening to an AM for one, and then to Catholic radio station. It matters that we know the why, is because, to your point, all the little things come down to the question, is there a God? Right. It's why do I choose not to swear? Why don't I go and kill someone? Why do I deal with, and we were talking about this contractor who's done me wrong, who has stolen $20,000 from me? Why do I not go and do something immoral to get them back? It's like, why do I not go and track them down and steal back from them? It all comes down to, a moral code. Well, what's the point of a moral code? Well, guess what? Humans aren't naturally moral beings. Like, you rewind 1,000 years, and we were killing, pillaging, and doing all the things because that was the normal expectation. It wasn't until Jesus came along and said something different. And so the moral code is defined only if there is an authority of truth. And so there's only authority of truth if there's a God. Right. And so that's why being able to understand and know that there's a God, because it dictates all the little pieces of your life.
No, that's huge. Haley, you're fresh off of, once again, not to give the Wyoming Catholic pitch again, but I'm just a huge fan of the school, and I know that they've got a solid as a rock philosophy and theology department out there. I assume these are topics that you've gone over a lot in class, right?
Yes.
There's apologetics and all this stuff. Can you speak a little bit to that? And you can take it higher level if you want to, but I just want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about, because I just took a semester on the Thomistic theology of the Trinity, which is super interesting and so fascinating. But I think from my philosophy class, I actually got more because we read Aristotle's De Anima, which is on the soul, and kind of going into science and how science isn't the fullness of truth, right? That we, at least from when I was in high school, that was kind of, I had to explain everything in some kind of scientific aspect, or else it didn't make any sense to me at all. Sure. And so then as I was going through these kind of more abstract concepts and the intellect and all of these ideas that ultimately point towards a higher God, it all came down to that science is it is true in a sense, but it isn't the fullness of something. That if you see the color green, for example, and you can know exactly how that works, that it's photons bouncing off your retina and causing electrical impulses, blah, blah, blah. Right. But there's also that you explaining how exactly it works to somebody in a completely scientific way is not going to actually give them the experience of green as well. Right? Yeah. That like and there is no way to explain that experience of green to somebody, except really in like a weird descriptive way that a blind person still wouldn't comprehend. And so it kind of shows that there's the reality in which we live has the scientific way in which we can understand it, but it also has this kind of experiential way that we as humans and living in the reality itself can understand it. And that kind of like really affected me in kind of in my way of reason, in that we live in a material world, but there is things and there are ideas beyond the material world.
Yeah, well, I love that's coming from Aristotle,
Good
right?
point.
Yeah.
A pagan, right?
Yeah.
And that's what's so cool about the ancients, and what's so cool about these guys who who are using their intellect without any revelation and are still coming to the same conclusions that your Thomistic philosophers and all of these great Catholic philosophers from the Middle Ages are coming to say, no, these abstract truths exist, and they're pointing towards a thing. And even though the ancients, they don't have the virtue of divine revelation in any form, they still, by virtue of that intellect, are able to discover and uncover these truths. It's beautiful.
Yeah, well, keeping with the science thing, some atheists will talk about how they will believe in God if they can see something scientific that's happened, something scientifically proving him.
Right.
And I think one of the best examples for that is the Eucharistic miracles, especially the ones that have happened. The past 4 that have happened that have been approved by the church are incredible. If you read all the different scientific explanations, very powerful.
Do you know this offhand? Do you know
not offhand?
A couple that you're referring to? So we can
there's one in Bryan Mercier, however you pronounce it, and that one was actually approved by Pope Francis when he was a cardinal. So looking at all those, I thought, well, what's the atheist response to the Eucharistic miracles? So I started researching and doing a deep dive, and what I figured out was half of them just said, no, it's not true, I just choose not to believe it. No scientific explanation for why, just I choose not to. Even when highly decorated medical scientists said that it is true, it goes beyond what we know of science, even currently. The other half was interesting. They said, even if it was real, which I don't deny that it isn't real, or it is, I still wouldn't follow him, even if it is real. And I thought that was really interesting, because I think a lot of times we place too many restrictions on God, which is hilarious. But, a lot of people say, well, I will believe in God if he appears in this specific way. If he opens the sky on a Thursday and I see him, then I'll believe. But if he does it in another way, I'm not going to believe.
Right.
And so I think the really big thing that's important is to understand the nature of God, and he does not do things like that. He doesn't create these sort of extravagant ways to present himself, because obviously the atheist argument is, well, if there's a God, why doesn't he just show himself? And in this past Christmas, our deacon was giving a homily, and he was quoting someone, and he said, there's nothing more dangerous than becoming used to the magnificent, which is so true, because if you think about the sun or the moon, these are planets that are orbiting our planet, and they sound so foreign to someone who wouldn't understand. We'll say someone from a different planet, they don't have a sun, what it actually is. It sounds so crazy, and it's like, wow, you must be so thankful. But we don't even give it a second thought, right? And the same way it'd be true with God, where if he just, in any sort of rhythm, on a Monday or every week or every month or every year, even every 100 years, the second he starts to rhythmically show himself, he becomes less magnificent to us. So I think that's really interesting, because I think that a lot of atheists don't take that into account. But yeah, I think his very nature is something that's important to know, which is why he doesn't just do these things. It's not in his nature.
I think what you were saying, what stood out to me, is something I've noticed that kind of cripples us when you're faced with a truth, but you deny it because you've latched so hard on to what you said. And I think we as Catholics, and many Catholics I know, also cripple ourselves in those discussions with other people, because we identify so much with our Catholic faith, which is a good thing, but should we not identify more as truth seekers? And because what we've found so far justifies what the Catholic Church has defined as true, that's why we're Catholic. But if I get if I get presented with other truth that will convince me otherwise, guess what? I'll become that. But I'm not going to do it after no means. But it's what I found to date is there's no arguments or experience in those combined that go away from the Catholic faith. So it's through the truth is what makes us believers. It's not because we're believers then we back into it. I'm curious, Bryan, if you've seen a lot of similar things and people's tied to their identity and how versus what's presented as truth, or how they logic that.
Oh, 100%. I mean, some people I mean, and hopefully maybe they'll convert later on, but, maybe the seeds have been planted and they'll sprout at another time. But I always talk about, how do we know God exists? The deep questions of life when I give confirmation retreats or speak at, college Newman centers and things like that. I like to give the evidence for God. And I remember I was speaking at a retreat once, and I just presented 45 minutes of evidence for God's existence and science and religion and all that. And I went up to this girl who was dressed all in black and looked like death. And I went up to her, I said, "Hey, what'd you think of the talk?" She's like, "I hated it." And I said, "Oh, I'd be interested to know why." And she said, "'Cause I'm an atheist." And I said, "Okay, great." I said, "Why are you an atheist? I'm just curious." And she's like, "'Cause I am." I was like, "All right, but, what are the reasons that you're an atheist, And she said, "Well, because I am." I said, "You said that, but do you have any actual reasons, or are you just tied to this identity type thing?" And she said, "Well, no offense, but I think you're all brainwashed." And I said, "Well, what did you think about the talk? I mean, I gave 45 minutes of proofs for God's existence." And she's like, "I didn't like it." I was like, "Well, why not? What did you disagree with?" She's like, "I don't want to talk about that. I'm just an atheist." So she was like, she did not want to grapple with facts. She just wanted to grapple with the fact that she was an atheist. She wouldn't let it go. And this goes back to what you guys were talking about. You don't want to talk about the Immaculate Conception. You don't want to talk about if they don't even believe in God. Yeah, her root problem was not that God doesn't exist. Her root problem was probably that she was really hurt somewhere along the line and maybe even abused herself, and she can't understand why God would let that happen. And it's kind of like an anger toward God, or now I don't even know if God exists. It's just kind of, I've fallen away from him. It's kind of, I've grown cold, and it's really sad, and she's really hurting. And so you have to really locate the deepest issues for these people, and then once you do that, then you can start making some progress in their life.
Well, it's so interesting because it's something that I was having a conversation about this last weekend, I think, and the idea that we are all religious beings by nature, right? We are all drawn towards something, and I firmly believe that every person is religious, just not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily align to a religion. Their religion might be in their lack of religiosity, like the atheist you're talking about, or like how some people make their sexual identity or something like that, just like this cult of being that their whole lives revolve around because they're desperately seeking to fill this hole in their heart that, not to sound cliche, but it's true, can only be filled by Christ, right? I am yet, and I stand by this. I've said this multiple times. I've gotten some pushback for it. I'm yet to find anybody who's ever left the Catholic faith for a theological reason that wasn't something that was a cover for something else, right? Somebody who will say, "Well, it doesn't say this in the Bible," and then you can say, "Well, let's look at that. Let's talk about the reasoning behind this." But every time I've ever had a conversation with someone who's left the faith, it's been over a terrible priest or something bad that happened to them, or some issue they have politically with something the Pope said, or something like this, right? Everything from them taking Latin out of the Mass to them not putting Latin back in the Mass, and then they became Orthodox, or then they became non-denominational, or whatever it is. And we're trying to fill that void with something. And to take it back to something that I think... Oh, please.
I don't want to follow the rules. I don't want anyone to tell me what to do. There's a whole list of reasons why people leave the faith, and you're naming a bunch of them, but there's just so many, which is why if you can locate that one thing, you can really bring these people back. I know for one man, he called me from Texas. He's like, "We need to talk about God. Someone told me you could answer my questions." He's like, "I don't believe in God, so prove to me God exists." I said, "Okay, well..." And I started talking, and he cut me off, and he went off for 20 minutes about why God doesn't exist. And so I was like, "Can I talk?" He's like, "Sure, go ahead." I talked again. He went off for another 10 minutes, and then another I couldn't talk for 45 minutes. And then when I could talk, I talked for quite a while, and he asked a lot of questions. And then after an hour, he says, "You want to know what my real problem is?" I said, "Yeah, please." So now we're getting somewhere. He said, "I don't understand how God could allow so much pain in this world. If he's so good and if he's so loving, why wouldn't he do something about it? Then we could have this awesome conversation about free will, and God doesn't make us robots." And I even asked him the question, I was like, "If you could take a shot in your arm that would take away all your pain for the rest of your life, would you take it?" And even before he could answer, I said, "There's one side effect. It's going to put you in a vegetative state for the rest of your life. So you'll never be able to love. You'll never have relationships again. You'll never fall in love. You'll never get married, but you won't have any pain." That's in effect what God would have to do to us, take away our free will in order to take away all of our pain. I was like, would you want that shot? He's like, oh, wow. He's like, that is a mic drop question. He's like, I don't even know the answer to that. He's like, I'm going to have to go think about that. Like, he's like, he gave me a lot to think about. Maybe we should stop here. But, like, I really think there was a lot of hope for him because we hit the nail on the head, and I got to address his questions directly.
Well, and that's a huge one that you hear about a lot. I mean, the problem of pain and why does God allow evil to exist? And you just did it through that story. But if I can just kind of rapid fire you a couple of questions, how do you respond? Sure. If right now I say, I love that analogy, but if right now I say, Bryan, I can't believe in this whole God thing because my child died, my mom has cancer, whatever it is, right? Any of the horrible, real things, and maybe I was abused as a child, whatever these very real, painful things that people struggle with, and we say, how could a God allow that to happen? How do you answer that?
Well, first of all, I find it interesting that the majority of young adults who are atheists because God let their mother die of cancer or even have cancer, the mother has strong faith and loves God more than anything. So I find that interesting. But what I usually tell them is that, God, first of all, God's not the author of cancer. God's not the author of confusion or evil or pain. Man and the devil is. In fact, God made the world perfect, if we remember. God made everything perfect. And he said, don't eat from the tree because bad things will happen. And they said, okay, fine. And then the devil came in, tempted them. They ate from the tree, and they basically pushed God away and said, we're going to do this our own way, God. God didn't want that to happen, but when humans try to do things their own way, bad things happen. The 95% of all the pain and suffering in this world comes from humans against other humans. So God's to blame for a lot of it, but really, we're the ones who are to blame, first of all. Second of all, if you follow God, he can heal even the bad stuff that does happen. So, for example, look at Jesus Christ who came into the world. What did he do? He came to reveal who God is. And what did he do? He healed everybody from their sins. He healed people who were sick, deaf, diseased, blind. He rose people from the dead. He even rose himself from the dead to show us two things. Number one, that if we come to him, he can heal us, help us, and kind of right the wrongs of our life. Number two, it's a foreshadowing of what God wants to do in heaven. This earth is not our home. It's a testing ground. And the Bible says that the rain falls on the righteous and the wicked. So there's just going to be suffering on this earth, but there isn't going to be suffering in heaven. So right now we're being tested. And if we go to heaven, God says the first thing in Revelation 21 that he's going to do is take away all the pain from, he's going to take away all the tears that we've ever cried, all the pain from our heart, and he's going to make us new, and we'll never experience pain or suffering again. That's our hope. And I tell atheists, here's the thing. Yeah, this atheist asked me, if your kid was killed, wouldn't you be angry? I said, yeah, I'd be devastated. I would be upset. I would be heartbroken. But here's the thing. As an atheist, if that happened to you, what would you do? Nothing. Afterlife, there's no hope, there's no justice, there's nothing but death and destruction and emptiness in the atheist worldview, whereas in the Christian worldview, it's still a tragedy, but I have hope that the end is coming. He can go to heaven with God and live happily for all eternity, and there won't be any death, despair, or destruction ever in heaven. And also, I'll be able to see him again someday in heaven. And also, God is a God of justice, so that murderer is not going to get away with it. In fact, God is going to get justice on that murderer. Where is the justice in the atheistic worldview? Where is the happiness, the hope, or anything in the worldview? I was like, I think the Christian worldview has the best answer for dealing with pain and bad things that happen in this life. Well, and he kind of agreed with that. So much of
the misunderstanding, I think, around the problem of pain comes from the fact that we have such a hard time, especially today, with understanding that we are not created for this world, that our life is not comprised of this temporal existence that we're experiencing right now, that we're made for something much, much greater than where we are right now. And I think that we have to keep that in mind. I want to give you one more just quick rapid fire. How do you answer this one, Bryan, if you're so smart? And then I want to open it up to any objections that you guys have heard. So if you've got anything that you hear regularly, please throw it out. Bryan, how can you worship this God that commands all these mean things in the Old Testament? Come on, those Philistines, there's all sorts of nastiness that's going on back there. How can you worship that guy? He's a megalomaniac. He's a monster. I'm not saying that, but I hear that a lot. How do you answer?
Sure. Most of that stuff was already going on before God came onto the scene. There was already tribal warfare going on. And if people don't know what tribal warfare is, that means you don't just conquer your enemies, you wipe them out completely. And that was going on. So God took Israel's side, and he couldn't just wipe this out of them. It was ingrained in their history. And so he just took Israel's side and helped bring them up and save them and bring them into the promised land. And then through them, he was going to help change the world, teach the world, and make the world a better place.
That's great. No, I think we lose the cultural understanding with everything. I mean, even going into the New Testament, but especially forgetting about the barbarism that was the ancient world until Christian civilization, to a large extent, civilized it to the standard that we have today. I was having a conversation with kids the other day, and we were talking about Christian civilization and what that means, and they were talking about New Testament views on slavery and things like that. And the conversation, it wasn't even my point, it was actually another kid made this point. I thought it was great. They said, yeah, slavery has always existed in every civilization. The Christians, it was a part of Christian civilization, but what makes them unique is that they were the ones that ended it, right? And I always thought that was beautiful. I want to open it up to you guys. We only have a few minutes left, unfortunately, but what are you hearing? Objections against God?
I would say just that God is, like, what would you say to someone who says God is real and they believe God is real, but they believe that he just created Earth and then just left us?
Yeah, absentee landlord.
Yeah.
Well, I would ask what their proof of that is. Like, why do they think that? It's hard to, I would want to get in their mind. Is it because things don't get answered the way they want? They just don't think that God's listening? What do you think they would say?
I think maybe, I don't know, I guess maybe just the fact that, like, nature seems to be able to sustain itself. So maybe, like, that there's no need for God to continue things that he's already started.
Yeah, what I would say to that is that's easily disproven by the fact that he sent his son into the world to show us how much he loves us, to teach us through Jesus Christ, who walked on this world and claimed to be the divine Son of God for 33 years. And he taught us, he healed us, he rose from the dead, and he continues to teach us today and work through the church he started. And if God really was distant and had wanted nothing to do with the earth, he never would have sent the prophets, he never would have sent Jesus. He really would not have taken such an interest in us.
Well, one thing that I always bring up is that morality, which is usually what they're talking about, right? Why God doesn't care if we follow all these rules. Reality is often, those rules, morality is often grounded in nature, right? We see people who live lives that we would consider moral and living by God's laws to be happy, fruitful, productive lives. And even the ones that aren't, even the ones that are where they're struggling and they're full of pain, at least you look at half the saints, right? Their lives are pretty miserable from just a creature comfort standpoint. They're some of the most joyful, hopeful people that exist. And we can lay that out in statistics. That's not just anecdotal evidence. In my theology of the body class, we talk about the effects of pornography or contraception or 100 different things on marriages and marriage satisfaction, sexual satisfaction, and going down that. I mean, it's a theology of the body class, so I'm using mostly that kind of stuff for reference. But nature reflects God's law in so many beautiful ways that I wish we had time to get into.
Yeah, and I think that love violates a lot of laws of nature also, because if you look at nature without humans in it, it's very horrific and unforgiving. Mm-hmm. And obviously love is it's the premise of love is self-sacrifice for the good of the other. And you don't see that in nature anywhere, really. I mean, you see, obviously animals care for their children, but you also see some other animals who kill their own children and things like that. So in order for us to, even have this sense of, self-sacrifice for other people, I think that's something that's too complex for even nature to conform to. But one question I had was, what would you tell a Catholic, someone who's been Catholic, I guess, their whole lives, or at least in the past few years, a true Catholic, what would you tell them if they have any doubts? They can't quite pinpoint why, but just like, what's a nugget of truth you can give them to hold on to for them to get out of, I guess, like a period of doubt?
Number one, I would ask them what their prayer life looks like. It shouldn't just be a few minutes before bed, but a good, deep prayer life, and to really, work on deepening it, because what you put into it is what you get out of it. Number two, is there any sin that they're struggling with? Is there an addiction in their life? Is there a wall that is keeping them from, kind of built up between them and God? Maybe look at those sins and try to work on them. And three, try to get some inspiration. Read the Bible, read spiritual readings, hang out with other good Catholic friends, and just keep on keeping on until, God decides to make himself known in their life. But the more you study your faith, the more you learn it, the more you practice it, the less you're going to doubt it. And don't go by feelings just because, I'm not sure why, but I do. No, that's just feelings. Sometimes the evidence adds up whether we feel it or not.
No, some of the best advice I've ever gotten from a person that I love dearly and view as a mentor is, you are not how you feel. And I thought that was such a good piece of advice. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm all about this. I could do this all night, but unfortunately we're well over time. I want to do one more big thank you to Bryan Mercier, the president of Catholic Truth. Bryan, what's the name of that book one more time?
It is called Why Do You Believe in God? And you can find it on Amazon. You can find it on our website, thecatholictruth.org. And I want to tell people to check out our Catholic Truth YouTube channel and podcast as well, because there's so many videos that'll help you learn your faith. And even we have former atheist conversion stories on there, and lots of existence of God topics, and pretty much anything that you're struggling with, you can find on our YouTube channel, or Catholic Truth TikTok, Instagram, all the rest.
Heck yeah, Bryan. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for being so patient during all of our technical difficulties. We really hope that you'll forgive us and come back on. We'd love to have you.
Sure, anytime.
All right, man. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't have time for your popsicle sticks today, but you are listening to AM 1160 The Quest, Atlanta's Catholic Radio. This is Honest to God. Producer Ben,
Signing off.
over and out.